the clothes are being counted through the Machatzis HaShekel, and as they're counted, they pass before Moshe and Aaron and the Nasi of the particular tribe. And it identifies who the Nasim, who the princes of each tribe, who they are. Then it concludes, Eila Kruei Ha'edo. These are the ones who are called to represent the Edo, the congregation. Nasim Matos Avosam. They're the princes of the tribes. Roshi Alpha Yisraelim, the head of the thousands of Jews, oversaw the thousands of Jews. So Rashi says, what is Mikru Eido? And the Krom Chodvar Chashivus Shabedo. When every issue of importance has to be discussed, since they represent each of the tribes, they are called as the representations of the tribes. So over here, the Balaturim, if you take a look at the Torah, the way it's written in the Torah, normally a vav is written, has a certain length. And the Gemara discusses a case, sometimes if you elongate a vav too long, and it's a question, is it a nun? Is it a closing nun, or is it a vav? It's a question what it is. So the Gemara says you call a child, and yes, the child, what does it look like? Does it look like a vav? Does it look like a nun? And based on what the child says, and the child has no idea what in the context of the word itself. So he's identifying the letter as the letter, and if he says that it looks like a vav, it's a vav. If it looks like a nun, it's a nun, and then it's not valid if it's supposed to be the vav. The vav here in the word kruei is written not as long as a regular vav is normally written. It's shorter than the vav. It's not as short as a yud, but it's elongated long enough. But it's not as long as a normal vav. A normal vav comes to the bottom of the other letters. Here, if you take long Torah, it's like it's split, it's cracked in the middle. So normally when a letter's split, normally it's a question whether it's kosher or not. Why over here is it shorter or it's split? So you look in the Palaturim, Havav Ketiyah. The Vav is Ketiyah, means it's broken, it's shortened. The Kari Kruei, and it's read Kruei as if the Vav would be ordinary Vav. Why is it written, the Vav written not as a full Vav, which indicates there's some kind of deficiency among these people that are being called to represent the Tzibor, because one of the Nesiim is Shlumi ben Tzuri Shaddai, Shu Zimri ben Salu. The whole story with Zimri, with Kozbi Basur, the story with the Balpor, when they were involved with the Midianite and Moabite women with the idolatry, he's the one who actually was the one who perpetrated the greatest Chil Hashem when he cohabited with the Midianite princess. And Pinchas, the zealot, took a spear and he pierced them, both of them together. So because he's among them, even though he's a Nasi, he was the prince at this moment, but since he was of that, ultimately was going to be that person, there's already a deficiency in this group. So to indicate the deficiency in the group, the Vav is written not as it's normally written, to indicate there's a deficiency. V'chein b'adas Korach. He finds same thing, adas Korach. First, the congregation of Korach. Kruei ksiv vav, chosev vav. There, the Vav is deleted totally. By das, because when they came as a group, they came to usurp Moshe Rabbeinu's position. So there, it's Kruei, the Vav is deleted. L'shem chosev vav l'gamri. There, because the congregation, every one of them, they were evil. All those people who joined with Korach to usurp Moshe Rabbeinu's authority. But here, the other Nisim, they were tzaddikim to indicate that there was a deficiency among the group. Therefore, the Vav is there, but it's written in a deficient context to indicate this deficiency, which ultimately was this person was Zimri. Okay, that's the Balaturim. We're at the beginning of the Ramban. The Ramban is the question, and that's where we left off yesterday. We find that David HaMelech, here the Torah tells us that when you count, we count with the Machatzis HaShekel. You never count Jews directly themselves. And David, Yoav was his chief of staff, he was the general, and he tells Yoav he wants to count the Jews. So Yoav says to David, I mean, why do you want to do this? It's something which is abominable. It's not going to be a good thing for us. Ultimately, we're going to be held guilty for doing this. David insisted. So the Ramban asks, I mean, David didn't know the halacha that when you count Jews, the Torah says you must do with a Machatzis HaShekel, because when you count Jews and identify them individually, it activates an audit. So you need a kofar. Those half silver coins are used for the communal sacrifices, which brings atonement. So you see, David didn't know something that a young child knows. That's where in the Ramban. So Ramban says, cites Chazal. 1 second. We're in the second paragraph, you have the Ramban there. You have the Ramban with the ArtScroll translation. So he writes, Vama David, Mitzpah Mifkarom, Ki Yoda Misporam, Bikidas HaKofer. David knew the numbers of the Jews based on the Kofer, which was the Machatzis HaShekel. Ki Rochu Getzli Shel Yuzor David Basha Omar HaKosuv. He says it's unacceptable to say that David was not careful. When he counts them, he doesn't count them with the Machatzis HaShekel. They will count it with the medium of the Machatzis HaShekel, which was the Kofer, which was the atonement. So therefore, he was concerned that he did whatever he can, that there should not be a plague, that the half silver coin was used for the Korbanus Tzibor, for the communal offerings. So he says, V'imulai to David, Lama lo also Yoav shkolim. He says, and even if you want to say David made the mistake, but Yoav, if you wanted to count them, instead of using, let's say, pieces of pottery or pieces of parchment, Yoav, who originally was opposed to it, he should have suggested we'll use silver coins. Each Jew gives half a silver coin. But yet it was something which was abominable to Yoav. It was difficult for him to do. This is going to be a basis to find fault in the Jewish people if we do it this way. I mean, if that was the problem, because they were doing without a Machatzis HaShekel, that it would not be brought as a korban, he should have suggested we'll use a silver coin. The Raman says, according to my understanding, he counted, there was no reason to count them. We'll see in a moment, he quotes Chazal, that the only time you're permitted to count Jews is for a purpose. When you have to have a standing army, and you have to know how many capable, able-bodied men you have, we count them. But over here, at this time, they weren't going to war. There was no reason to count them. So even though you use the medium, which is the Machatzis HaShekel, but if it's not for a purpose, we're open for this plague, and that's what happened, as explained. They weren't at that time ready to go to war. And there was no reason to count them. It's only to give joy to his heart that he should feel pride or privileged, that he was able to reign over such a large number of people. That's why he wanted to be counted. He should feel this privilege. He rules over such a large nation. David, and this is what Yoav says to David, despite that, he says, let Hashem increase their number 100 times, whatever they are. That we have multitudes of Jews, it should be, why do you have to count them? What do we need it? Hashem should bless us 100 times what we have now, but what do you need this for? What do you have to know the number? And he says that's exactly what Yoav was saying to David. Midbar Sinai Rabbo, he says the Medrash Rabbo, which is the main Medrash on Bamidbar, Rebbe Lezer b'Shem Rebbe Yossi ben Zimra Omar. Whenever the Jews were counted for a purpose, there was never a chesara, there was never a deficiency. They were never minimized due to that counting. But if they were counted where the reason wasn't sufficient, chosru. Ezesman nimnu l'tzorech. What was it considered? They were counted for a reason. That there was really a legitimate reason. They made Moshe. When we counted Moshe Rabbeinu with the Golim. The Golim means how we traveled in the desert, the 4 camps, how many people were in each of the camps. The center camp was the camp of the Shekhinah. So we counted, we divided Canaan after the conquest. It was the dividing of the land. Shlo Tzorch David. And what was Shlo Tzorch? That it wasn't valid, the counting. David's counting was not considered Tzorch. And there's no Tzorech, even if you use the medium of the Machatzis HaShekel, it doesn't ward off the plague, and that's why there was plague. As a result of David's counting, Jews started to die. Because the Jews, when they're individualized, that opens each person for an audit. That's one approach. He just wanted to know the number, and since it wasn't sufficiently justified, that's why we had the plague. That's the first approach of the Rambam. The Ode, maybe there's another way to understand it. What does that mean? When the Torah speaks about counting Machatzis HaShekel, it's from the age of 20 and above. When you qualify for conscription, David counted every Jew from the age of Bar Mitzvah and up. Because meaning responsible Jews, called Bar Chiyuva, how many Jews are part of the clan in terms of have responsibility? Which the Torah doesn't speak about counting anybody below the age of 20, even with a medium. Ki David Tzivah Limnos called the Ish Yisrael, Ritzon Lo Ben Es Shlosh Es Rishona V'Malo Shuish. Once they assumed the classification of Ish, an adult, he wanted them to be counted. Ki Lo Niska B'Minyano Ben Es Rishona V'Malo. If you look in the Psukim, it doesn't mention that the people were counted from the age of 20 and above. They were Ish. Avol Oma L'chus Sipru Es Yisrael, just count the Jews. Vedas Bisporam. And I want to know the number. This is very important. And this was the basis for the punishment. The Torah only allows Jews to be counted from the age of 20 and above when you use the medium of the shkolim, of the half a silver coin. Because of Tobo. Therefore, it doesn't say that wasn't the mistake. Above the age of 20, it's okay. He believed, even if you're less than 20 years old, even though you're not qualified for conscription, but if you give the half a silver coin, which is used for the korban tzibur, for the communal offering, that will ward off any negative consequence. Yoav was his chief of staff. He was concerned about this. Now, now this is very important. What was the problem? Hashem says, I will increase the Jews, they'll be like the stars of the heaven. This is very important. The Jewish people, Hashem says, he says they should be like the stars of the heaven. They are an unquantifiable nation. The Jews cannot be quantified. That's what Hashem doesn't want. When you start counting them, and it doesn't have that reason, you're going to war or some other reason, what do you count? You want to quantify. Hashem says, I don't want my children to be quantified. Just as you can't quantify the stars of heaven, the Jews cannot be quantified. As he says to Avram Avinu, as you cannot count the stars of the heaven, your children cannot be counted. Ein inyanu shu kulam yotzi tzva b'Yisrael, shu yibrim chazok l'mechomo, higid kolomona hacholim hachavosh v'azkenim, ne'shu yidvar hamelech nisa v'etzlo. Even when he counted him, he didn't count all of them. Ze'in haguf ma'od al das med shagodo. So what exactly was the sin of David? Why are Jews counted only when we have to go to war? So that the Ramban says, "Ein som chanal anes." You have to have a standing army. We have to know how many people are qualified to go into battle. So I'm not counting them for the quantification. That there's a purpose. But to know how many Jews there are, Hashem says, as you cannot come upon the numbers of stars, it's unfathomable. The Jews are unfathomable people. They cannot be quantified. Now, what's the understanding? So we discussed, the Mishnah tells us in Sanhedrin that when you save one Jew, it's like saving the whole world. So we touched upon this yesterday. You have over 1 billion people. One Jew is the equivalent of the billion. How's it possible? We're not talking about quantitative. We're talking about qualitative. What is the innate value of the neshama of a Jew? It's unfathomable. But once you put it into numbers, so what are we doing? We're quantifying and saying the value is their physicality. It's not the qualitative, it's the quantitative. You missed the boat. Hashem says the innate value of the Jew is not quantity. It's the innate quality. It's qualitative. Therefore, one Jew is equivalent of the whole world. Because otherwise you have a question. When were the Jews, when did we ever reach this unfathomable number? We never reached it. As many Jews you have, you still could come upon the number. The answer is Kochvei Hashamayim lo yisofer, to be like the stars, them they can't be counted. They cannot be quantified as the stars can be quantified. To come upon the reality of the innate value of the Jewish people, you cannot come upon them. And that's why number by us means nothing. You have 15 million Jews. If you have 1,000 Jews, you have 1 million of Jews. You have Edo. 10 Jews is a microcosm of the whole Jewish people. Of course, it's the innateness of our neshama which gives us that value, which is unquantifiable, because it's something which is our spirituality. It's not our physicality. Because the Jewish people are a spiritual people. We eternal. And that's the reason why, by giving us a number, we're distorting the reality of who we are. So that's what David said. What was the consequence of the counting? It was a plague. Why is it a plague? Because David wanted to know the number. But Hashem says, you're off the rail here. You're distorting by wanting to know the number. You're distorting the reality of who the Jewish people are. We're not about number. We're about who we are. Who are we? We are the Goy Kodesh with the Am Hashem. That's who we are. It's because we're connected to the infinite. That's who we are. And has nothing with number. And therefore, we read in last week's parsha in Bechukosai, if you follow my statutes and you do my mitzvos, one Jew will pursue.
I'm just in the middle. Wait 1 minute.
Eric, Nathaniel, keep easy pass, my easy pass to Eric.
One Jew will pursue 100. 100 Jews will pursue 10,000. It's unheard of. How does one Jew pursue 100 and 100 pursue 10,000? The answer is because it's not quantity versus quantity. It's not it. It's a different realm of what our representation is. Therefore, one Jew could pursue 100 and 100 could pursue 10,000. And Rashi over there says the mathematics is not right. If 100 Jews, one Jew pursues 100, so it should say, and 100 Jews pursues 2,000. So why does it say 100 Jews pursue 10,000? So he explains, because in a domain, you cannot compare when a small number do a mitzvah and when you have a larger number doing mitzvah. It's a different dimension. The sum total is greater than its parts. It's a different dimensional representation of Kiddush Hashem. As a result of that, the 100 can pursue even 10,000 for that reason. So why was the result of the counting plague? You're valuing the number. Hashem says, I'm going to teach you something. Number by us means nothing. You have to meet certain criteria. That's criteria in halacha. But outside of that, number means nothing. And therefore it says, what is the result of that? Bounty, which is not quantifiable bounty. Because when you enter into the spiritual realm, the yardstick is no longer a physical yardstick. And that's why Ochel Kimo Misbarak Meov, Vachaltem Lesova. Eat a minuscule of food. And what? And it sustains you and nourishes you. How's it possible? The answer is because, again, within the physical, everything is what? Is based on the quantity. In the spiritual, it's the innateness. And therefore, the bracha has nothing to do with volume. It has to do with the reality, with what Hashem wants. That's the understanding. The bracha, if a woman is pregnant and she's conceived more than 40 days earlier, and she prays that she wants it to be a male or a female, whatever she wants to pray, it's a tefillah shov. It's a tefillah in vain. Why? Because after 40 days, the gender is already set in place. It cannot change. The only way it could change is what? If a miracle takes place. So therefore, it's a tefillah shov. What? You have gold and you have iron. I'm going to pray this iron should turn into gold. Instead, it's nonsense. Well, I'll pray for a miracle. We don't pray for miracles. You don't pray for miracles. That's a tefillah shov. You pray for something which is the realm of possibility. There's a minority, there's statistics. You pray for Rachmi Shamayim, you pray for that. But something which is not relevant, you pray a person dies, you should come back to life. It's not reality. Therefore, it's a tefillah shov. Or you take an oath, you're not going to sleep for 3 days. It's not possible. When you go to war, you have to have a standing army. Whether you're going to win the war, not win the war, it's a separate discussion. We've mentioned once the name of Chazon Ish. We find that Yosef, the story with the Sarah Mashkin, with the wine steward, after he interpreted his dreams, he said 2 words. Uschartani viskartani. Remember me and mention me. And that was considered a lack of faith for Yosef. So they asked the question, what about Ishtadlus? Here he has an opportunity. So the Medrash says, of course, there wasn't a chance that this man was going to help him. And it quotes a pasuk, because the Egyptians, they're what? They have no appreciation. They don't have a capacity to reciprocate at any level. So when Yosef asked to be helped by this man, it was a lack of faith. It was considered an act of desperation. It's like a person is drowning and there's straws floating on the surface of the water, and you grasp at straws. Do you think the straws can hold you up? The only person who could even believe that, you're in a state of desperation. You're not in touch with reality. Based on who the Sarah Mashkin was, an Egyptian, there wasn't a chance he was going to remember or mention it. So that was called desperation. And he gives a marshal, he explains it with an allegory. A person is being chased by a rabid dog, and you're able to escape the dog by jumping on top of a wall or scaling a wall, and you don't, and you stop and pray. You're a fool. If you're able to outrun the dog and scale the wall, what are you stopping and praying? But let's say there's no way you could outrun that dog, and you run, and the dog's going to get you. Where you running? What you should do at that moment, understanding it's beyond your capacity, stop, pray for Hashem for Rachmim. That's the only chance you have. Otherwise, it's not going to work. But as long as it's within the realm of possibility that you can make a difference yourself, you don't rely on. That's called desperation. In a situation where there's no chance, Yosef, because he was desperate, he wanted to get out of prison already, he was in this dungeon, therefore he didn't see clearly, and he believed he could rely on this man, which there wasn't a chance that it had any value.
Hashem told Moshe.
One statement is, a person who fasts, he's a kadosh. You're a holy man when you fast. And the other one says you're a sinner. So the more asks, are you a sinner or you're a kadosh? What are you? So it says, so the more answers that if you, physically, the fast doesn't in any way affect you negatively, and you could function with the same vibrancy, despite the fact you're not eating, then you're a kadosh, because you're weaning yourself from physicality. But if the consequence of fasting weakens you, and you can't serve Hashem with the same level of energy, then you're doing the wrong thing. Because you're supposed to eat. If you need the food to give you the energy to be more involved and have greater clarity, what are you trying to accomplish? You're compromising the area where you're supposed to be fully engaged, and you're not, because you chose to fast. Sure, there's no obligation to fast. You chose self-imposed fast. If you have to do something, you do it. Well, I want to be that. We don't dictate. We follow. If it compromises our spirituality, we have no right to compromise it. If it, despite that, it doesn't, then you do it. If you can win yourself, be less involved in the material. You go to war, you have to have that standing army. When we went to Mijon, there were only 1,000 men from each tribe. Normally, they all went. By Milchemes Mijon, the war of Mijon, to destroy Mijon. But who dictated the numbers there? Elef Lamata, Elef Lamata. That was Hashem said. Hashem says, this war, you don't have to have that standing army. This is a whole different realm of confrontation here. 1,000 each one, that's enough. You don't need. Or the story Dvor and Borok, when they went to fight the Assyrians, right? Also, they took 10,000 men went to war. Not more than there. She was a prophetess, because that she says that we're not going with more than that, and we would destroy them. Story with Sisera, right? The general. Same idea, but under normal circumstances, you don't go to war unless you have weapons, right? I'll go with a lulav, I'll go with my gartel and wave it at the enemy, and they're going to fall dead. Not the way it works. We live in a real world. We don't rely on miracles. We do whatever we can, whether we succeed or not. That's up to Hashem. After we've taken the initiative.
So, if you were a spiritually connected general, and you weren't sure how many bullets you had, would you not count the bullets? Because you want the bracha of not having counted something finite to make it finite?
You're counting your harvest. How many bushels do you have? You quantify the bushels, the amount. You say a tefillah, it's a tefillah in vain. As we discussed, because something of spiritual nature cannot come upon something that already was quantified. That's called miracle. You're not going to change the reality of what's been quantified as reality. But if it's an unknown number, the tefillah may bring a miracle, may bring the bracha, which is in the spiritual realm. When you're going to war, you're entering the state of danger. The Torah says, when it comes to war, danger, you have no right to rely on miracle at all. You have to make sure to do your best. And if you don't know that and you're able to deal with it differently, then you have no right to engage in war. Let's say you don't have enough bullets, or you're not sure. Something, if you could escape the enemy, escape them. You have no choice. You do whatever you have to do, even if you're going to be killed, if you're able to minimize the enemy. But to go to war, which is a state of danger, has nothing to do with it. You have no right. You're not permitted to cross that line, to enter into that state of danger. Give you an example. Wearing a seatbelt, according to the statistic, wearing a seatbelt is safe and safety. It don't. If a person that gets involved in a sudden stop or whatever it is, he can be subject to be hurt. Person says, something, Hashem says, I don't have to worry about these things. No. If you could put that seatbelt on, you put that seatbelt on. It's being irresponsible. Because there you're entering in a state where you need that protection. Because there is a statistic of danger. Therefore, you put it on. Or you have to put on a life vest when you're in a boat. Because very often, if you don't have it, there's a statistic, you put it on. Same idea. Also possible that the result of tzedakah, and he explains like this, explains it with a mushal. A person has a handful of wheat kernels, and he's able to satisfy his hunger. He's not at the brink of starvation. And a person is short-sighted. To satisfy his hunger, you know what he does? He eats that handful of kernels. The smart person does. He takes that handful of kernels, he plants them, and ultimately it'll produce 20 bushels of wheat. So even though he'll go hungry for a while, but ultimately, when it's harvest time, he's going to have 20 bushels of wheat. He eats this handful of kernels, he ends up with nothing in the future. So the other person doesn't understand how it works. He says, it doesn't make any sense. You're taking kernels which could sustain you now, you put it in the ground, it rots, because that's part of germination, but he doesn't realize after it rots and decomposes, all of a sudden, wheat grows out of the ground. Endless more wheat than you put in the ground. You only put a handful of kernels. But the person doesn't understand. He says, eat the handful of kernels and you starve to death in the future. That's exactly what Hashem is saying. You follow my prescription. You do what I want, you'll see it. You got to be patient. But at the end, you'll be successful, succeed, you'll be victorious. You do it your way, God forbid, you won't even understand what to attribute your casualties and your losses to.
And out of curiosity, is there